You always laugh at every one of my jokes. He's my biggest supporter here. Ani Tanse Buju. Good evening, everyone. Tanse Natotemek, Nanaskamun Nipawewin Wachiasquil. I am Standing Mountain Woman of the Battle River Cree people in Eagle Hills. My given name is Arlise Lafreniere Whitney. I am from Red Pheasant Cree Nation in central Saskatchewan. I am honored to be here today to welcome you to the Northern Road Link Open House. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that Thunder Bay is built on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, which includes the Ojibwe of Fort Williams First Nation, signatory to the Robinson-Superior Treaty of 1850. We also acknowledge the spirits of the land, the water, the four-legged, and all the ancestors that have contributed to the growth of today's society and walked these lands before us. Today is not only about giving you an update on the project and where it currently sits, it's also about listening to you and to what you have to say. So for those of you that are in the room, welcome to joining us today. We have comment forms located at the registration table. And for those of you that are joining us virtually, if you do have questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to shoot us an email at info@northernroadlink.com. Today we are going to hear from Angela Brooks, Project Manager for Northern Road Link Project, followed by some time for questions and answers. At this point, I would like to introduce Michael Fox, Co-Project Lead, to give a project overview.
Thank you. And for those online, hopefully you can hear me. I'm here with my other colleague, Qasim Sadiq. He's also the other co-lead for the Northern Road Link project. Just a bit of a background. This is an Indigenous-led process by Martin Falls First Nations and Webequie First Nations. They came together and worked out a project governance structure that includes a working group with members from each of the two communities and created some Indigenous principles that guides the process, the studies that you will discover this evening with the storyboards, the fact sheets, and the website. I really stress the website for the project website because there's a lot of information there and it's always updated for the general public to review and comment on. So with that said, we have a short presentation by Angela, our project manager. So Ange, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. All right, so this is a update presentation about the Northern Road Link and where we are in the project at the moment. So just as an introduction and background and a reminder of what this project actually is, it's a proposed all-season road in Northern Ontario in Treaty 9 territory. The proponents of the project are Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. The road will connect to the Ring of Fire mineral deposits via the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. Now, this road will provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to also connect to the all-season highway network. The project is subject to the Provincial Environmental Assessment and the Federal Impact Assessment. And the Federal and the Provincial Environmental Assessment and Impact Assessment, it's a coordinated process, and that is what we are doing with this project. So this is a little schematic of the project team. It's community-led, as I said, from Webequie First Nation and Martin Falls First Nation. And we have the community and the chief and council at the top. And surrounding the two communities is our working group, which is made up of members of Martin Falls and Webequie First Nation. And we also have, in general, just the community, because they provide a lot of input to the project. We have our project co-leads, who are Mike and Cossum, and then the technical experts, which is a consulting team. All right, so here is a diagram of the three roads. The Northern Road Link is the road in the center with the hatched line. And you can see the Martin Falls Community Access Road to the south, that's the purple. And it will connect to the provincial highway network through the Anaconda Road and the Painter Lake Road. And the Webequie Supply Road, is up at the top in red, and that'll connect from Webequie to the northern terminus of the Northern Road Link. Okay, so as I said earlier, this project is subject to an environmental assessment / impact assessment, provincial and federal. And you're probably wondering, what is an EA? Well, it's a process to predict, evaluate, and mitigate potential environmental effects of a project. The EA itself supports planning and decision making. A large portion of the project includes engagement with rights holders and stakeholders to inform the process. And this next bullet point, these are the things that are actually what we do in the project. We conduct baseline studies. So by that I mean all the field studies, including archaeology, groundwater, caribou studies, birds, whatnot, the list goes on. We assess the project environment interactions and effects and identify mitigation measures. After all of that is done, all of the mitigation measures are identified, we will have what's called residual impacts, and those are impacts that can't be mitigated. And it's at this point where we conduct the cumulative effects on those residual impacts. And lastly, we'll have commitments to follow up and adaptive management plans as it moves forward into the next stage. This is a little schematic of our current schedule. We are right in the center there in 2024. We're still doing baseline studies. We still have a lot of people out in the field. This is open house number 4. We're in the middle of our alternatives assessment, which is what I will talk about in the next few minutes. And at this point, we are tracking towards a minister's decision on the impact assessment. That's a federal process in 2029. And we expect the provincial decision in 2028. So this is a little simplified schematic of the provincial environmental assessment process. That little red arrow thingy, that's where we are, which is in the EA section of the project. This is the federal impact assessment process. We're in the same stage, except for the feds. It's called impact statement. Now, this is what we're actually here to talk about today, and this is our alternatives assessment. So this map is showing all of our alternative corridor segments. They're all outlined in different colors. And we have a few common segments that don't have any alternatives, and those are a couple on the south end and that one kind of in a little bit north of the Attawapiskat. You can see that we have a 2-kilometer wide corridor, and that's to allow for routing of the actual road right-of-way within that 2-kilometer corridor. All right, so this is where we'll get into what an actual alternatives assessment is all about. So we start out the assessment, we use various criteria to compare corridor alternatives in order to select a preferred corridor. And then once we select a preferred corridor, the assessment will compare other things such as ancillary infrastructure, such as the location of construction camps, turnout areas for safety on the road, that kind of thing. And then as part of that, then we're looking at the potential road alignments within this 2-kilometer corridor. So where are we at in the alternatives assessment? Well, at the moment, we are carrying out, it's called a multi-factor analysis. It's a fancy way of saying we're looking at, this is another fancy word, the valued components. So these are, I'll show a slide in a little bit, but it's things in the environment that interact with the project. It's, so let me go through this first. We go through a computer modeling tool called Pangea, and we input spatial data into that model. Now, the information that has to be put into the model has to be measurable. So, for example, it has to be how many streams are we crossing? What's the width of this overall width of the streams that we're crossing? That kind of thing. It can't be something that's nebulous. It has to be something that's measurable. Now, just to give you a little bit of primer on the terms that we use in the alternative assessment, we have a factor, criteria, and indicator. So the way that's easiest for me to explain this, so a factor is kind of the overall umbrella. And for these two examples, we have Indigenous land use and interest and cultural heritage resources. The next thing we have is criteria. So under Indigenous land use and interest, we have, this is a bad example, Indigenous land use and interest. That's actually a separate criteria. And within that criteria, we have a couple of indicators. And these are the measurable factors, if you will. So we have, for example, area of Indigenous trap lines. That's measurable. Area of designated protected areas intersected by the road corridor. That's also measurable. Under cultural heritage resources, we have archaeological sites and built heritage. So for archaeology, we can input how many hectares of potential archaeological resources we have, or registered or known ARC sites such as burial sites or sacred sites. And under cultural heritage, the same thing, areas of potential built heritage resources. So that's what I mean by it has to be measurable. It can't just be a feeling or I don't like that or that doesn't make sense. It's something that is actually measurable. So we did the first run of the model, and these are some of the results that have come out. I'll just do a really quick summary. So the first result is the longest routes scored worse than the shorter routes, which just kind of makes common sense. You want to shorten the distance of the road, which means shorter or smaller impact on the environment. Option 5, which is the one in the middle, seemed to score worse for all factors, and that's mainly because a lot of option 5 is running on the peatlands. Half of it's on the esker, that southern half. Option 6, which is all on the esker, scored best for Indigenous land use and interest, physical environment, and technical considerations, basically engineering and constructability. Option 3, I said earlier, this one really blew me away, scored best for natural environment. It's solidly on the peatland, and that's because the esker is a sensitive area for a number of reasons in the natural heritage factor. And option 7 scored best for the socioeconomic environment. Options 1 and 2 over there on the left, they're pretty much the same. I didn't say this earlier, but in case you're wondering why there's those two little options up at the north end, that's because there's a bald eagle nest smack dab in the middle, so we're going around it. So those are our preliminary results. We're going to be running the model again. We have additional information coming in from our baseline studies, from archaeology, and a number of other things. We're gathering more information. We're going to run the model again later this fall. And the main reason why we're here today, tomorrow is to get input from the communities and the broader area to feed into this environmental assessment. Sorry, the alternatives assessment. So the other reason why we're here today is also to talk about study plans. So the study plans are actually a requirement of the provincial EA. They're not a requirement of the federal EA process. And basically what they are, they're reports that outline the proposed methods that we will be using in the environmental assessment process. And they'll be used to assess the potential effects of the project. And here's the things that we have to include in the study plans are how we're going to collect the baseline data, how we're going to analyze that data. We've included proposed predictive modeling and how that will work. And it's a short section on the effects assessment scoping. We've completed approximately 16 study plans, and they're being prepared for key valued components of the environment. I'll show you that slide in a second. The draft plans have been submitted to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, as well as the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. And here we are as a reminder of what valued components are. So in the study plans, I mentioned that there's plans being prepared for the valued components. And you might ask, what is a valued component? Well, they are a component of the environment that has been identified as important and or sensitive to change, of concern or value for cultural or traditional purposes, and they are likely to interact with the project and project activities. So under our VCs, value components, we have 6 main umbrellas: Aboriginal treaty rights and interests, the biological, physical, human health, socioeconomic, and cultural heritage resources. And that lists everything that's included. So each one of these is a separate study plan. Now, another thing that is important that we need to talk about, and it's come up as an issue from time to time, and we want to keep talking about it, is the construction through the peatlands. We know the area is really important from a biological standpoint, from an Indigenous rights and interest standpoint, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of it and that we're not going to be having any negative impacts on this important area. And the way that we are going to do this is through complex engineering and an environmental perspective. So what we've done is we've looked to other projects. Our construction team has worked in northern Manitoba in similar geographic peatlands on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. And this is guiding us in our construction approach. And the easiest way to explain how the construction is going to happen is just by saying that this is a floating road. And you may have heard this, somebody talking about it in the past, and it's essentially we're going to be putting a geogrid or a geotextile over top of the peat, and then blast rock over top of that, and then the other road material on top of that. And we have a bunch of schematics in the back on one of the poster boards, and we have actually those guys in the back on the left are gathered around our little road model. I really recommend going to look at the model because it shows a really good representation of what the construction of the road is going to look like and how it's going to sort of float on the peat. You know, I'll use an example. In Thunder Bay and elsewhere in Southern Ontario, we tend to cut and fill when it comes to road construction, but we're not going to do this. That's why we're going with this innovative method of floating road methodology. Michelle, would you like to come and speak to the next slide? Sure.
So just thinking about the road and the schematic, you know, like I imagine the technical team as they're doing groundwater studies, like just you know, if you're gonna build a road essentially on top of the peat, I'm just thinking like what happens if the groundwater levels decrease in say 5-10 years? Will that make the road sink?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's one thing that the engineers are looking at, and this is why we're doing extensive groundwater studies at the moment. So they're actually modeling all of that and figuring out how it's flowing. And I've seen some of the initial results of all of those studies, and they'll be figuring out on the under the floating road, they'll be putting cross culverts in to facilitate the flow of water underneath to make sure that the groundwater keeps flowing. So that's one part of your thing. And your other question you asked, will the road subside? And yes, that's a very big possibility. And our engineering team has experienced that in Manitoba. And that's all a part of the road maintenance further down the line. And you just have to maintain the road and fill in the extras like where it subsided. This is where I wish we had one of our engineers with us, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a biologist. They'd be able to answer that a lot more detail, but that's scratching the surface.
So how would the preventative maintenance look like for maintaining a road? I don't think anybody would like to see a truck tip over because of a
No, exactly.
boggy
So this
road.
is something that's going to be an ongoing thing. It's monitoring. I don't know why I'm not having any words come to me. Pardon? Yes, it just ongoing monitoring of the road. That's our intention, is to have people hired, and that's what their job will be, to ensure the safety of the road once it's built, and so things like that don't happen. You know, like we get on regular old gravel roads where you get the washboard and the potholes. Be looking for that kind of thing too, and just ongoing maintenance.
How many Ks of this peak road you're gonna have?
How many kilometers?
Yeah.
It depends on what the preferred alternative will be, but it could be as many as 130 up to 160 kilometers if the preferred alternative is chosen as only on peat. But if it's a combination of on the esker and then partially on the peat, it could be maybe 50 or 60 kilometers.
And the total distance of the road?
It varies from 130 to 160.
No, I mean the total distance of the whole road.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
you're saying 130 Ks total road?
to 160, depending on the, let's go back to that slide, depending on the alternative that's chosen.
Okay. And how many Ks of peat?
Could be, 100. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd say it could be up to 130.
So that's a total road.
Yeah, actually, no, that's not true. So this section is on the esker.
Okay.
So this is peat, and part of these alternatives are also on peat.
Okay.
So maybe a little bit more than 50% of this, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know what this distance, this is 100% peat, and this is all esker.
So it looks maybe like half of the road? Half of the road will be peat?
Could be, yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm with Dillon Consulting, and I'm part of the consultation team, and I'm part of the team leading the work on the Aboriginal Land or Treaty Rights and Interests. So I'm just going to cover aspects of the work that we're doing for this project for the Northern Road Link. So one of the things that we're doing is a very innovative new approach where we're doing a two-phased knowledge program, which is one of the first of its kind and is led wholly by Indigenous communities. So what that Indigenous knowledge program does is support Aboriginal and or tree rights and interests collection that we have to do as part of our environmental and impact assessment process. And the way it does is twofold. So one of the main ways it does is that collecting Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous land and resource use information and related information that's been previously collected by communities. We were inviting them to share that information with us in whatever way that they prefer. And what we're also requesting or advising communities to undertake is maybe completing a project-specific studies that relate to their Indigenous knowledge and indigenous information that they want to share, including any cultural values and rights and interests information that they would like us to know as we continue with our process. So one of the main things that I really want to speak to today is that we have funding available to support capacity concerns that Indigenous communities have while collecting and sharing Indigenous knowledge. So if anybody is interested to learn more about that program and the capacity funding support, please come find me. I'll be around all evening to chat about it as well. What we've also undertaken as part of our outreach and trying to build information and knowledge about our program as well as generate interest is we've undertaken Aboriginal and or tree rights and interest forums where we've invited communities to participate with us to come and share their information. Last year in February and in November, we hosted 2 forums where we had participation from quite a few Indigenous communities that are part of our project, and they shared information with us. We learned so much about them. They learned a lot about the project as well, and it felt like we had started conversations with them. This last year as well, we shared a study area memo of where we are looking at for our Aboriginal land or tree rights and interests, like what our basis is for studying for this project. And what we did was that we shared that memo with the preliminary study area. So we shared maps and shapefiles with the communities last year. And this year, based on the feedback that we received from the communities, we updated those and provided them back to the communities to comment on or, share with their organizations or with their members so that they would know what we're doing here with the Northern Road Link. And that's it. That's what I have to speak to about the Aboriginal and or tree rights and interests section of our environmental assessment process. And what I would also invite you to is to come check out the poster boards where we've laid out all the maps and all the information and the timelines for our process as well. Yep, thank you. Sorry, can you?
How favorable is the percentage-wise is the community in favor of this road? How much positive impact do you have from the native community up there?
For like the specific communities, our proponents, Webequie, First Nation, and Martin Falls, they're behind this project. This project supports their own directives and their own priorities for their areas, so they are supportive of it. But we continue to build community support for these projects across the board. Yes, of course.
Just actually show that starting dates, just that the lot more approval, but I know the environmental assessment has been done already, so I thought he'd be busy right now, but still have to wait for the approval.
So we're going through the environmental assessment process right now.
Yeah.
And then once that's approved, then we talk about the design aspect of the project, and then it becomes shovel ready and the work begins. But I can have Ange speak more too on that if you'd like.
Microphone for the stream.
Yes.
Dates?
I thought it'd be
let me go back to our little schedule schematic. Where is that? So the provincial environmental assessment is, at this moment, we're tracking for approval in 2028. And the federal, 2028, so another 4 years, and then the federal, the impact assessment decision from the federal minister is 2029. So we still got a ways to go. Yeah. There's a lot of studies and there's a lot of, thought being put in the process, and the impact assessment, it takes a long time. This whole report at the end is going to be filling binders. It's going to be 1,000 pages long or more.
Yeah, but if the First Nations has given the approval already, but it's just the bureaucratic approvals.
Well, that's how the whole process works. It
yeah, but still,
I understand. Yeah, it is.
it's kind of frustrating that it takes so long. But you talk about 29. My God.
Yeah, it's a long way. It's still 5 years.
Oh, I'd be retired by this.
Any other questions in the room or virtually? If you are joining us virtually, please feel free to leave your questions, comments in the comment spots. And if that wraps it up for questions, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us in person today as well as virtually. We do have a few more open houses coming up. We have 2 more open to the general public tomorrow, 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. And we will be in Geraldton on the Thursday, just 2 days from now at 6 p.m. And of course, Timmins on the 11th as well. We do have a few door prizes to give away for those of you that are in the room. So if you can take this time to pull out those little white tickets, we'll have Jen do the honors here. All right, Terry. Do we have a Terry in the room? Yeah. There you go. Congratulations.